Well, the question sort of what is the recovery movement, I think has to come from sort of where does it come from? It's a response to something. And sort of the first piece of this is that, it's a response really driven by consumers themselves, and in particular consumers, sort of advocacy organizations like NAMI. It's really driven by this idea of self-determination and issues of civil rights. And what you really hear is them picking up kind of a civil rights narrative. Nothing about us without us. It's also partially a response to what's perceived to be an unsustainable dependency or disabling relationship that's emerged in public mental health care. And by this, what's meant by a lot of people is that the system has helped to continue to disable people with mental illness. The sort of classic way that this gets articulated is this struggle that social workers and other clinicians face on a regular basis, which is, well, this person who's come in here has no insurance, has no way to pay for anything. I need to get them in to see me, but they have no source of funds. Well, let's apply for SSI for them. Let's try it, and suddenly they become disabled. And so the struggle that people are in, it's a financial struggle. There are other people who, of course, fit a more sort of natural model, if one wants to put it that way. But in many cases, the idea is that there's something in the system itself that has made people more dependent on the system, and that the recovery model works to combat that. So the belief that the current mental health care practices contribute to passivity, hopelessness, and chronicity, in essence. The recovery movement is also partially a response to fiscal problems associated with the federal disability programs. And this is what I'm talking about. This is what I was suggesting a minute ago. And I think these two things, the question of dependency and the question of fiscal policy, both end up bleeding together in weird ways, especially on the ground. Sort of as an academic, one can sit back and easily disentangle these things. Oh, no, one of these is big federal policy. The other is you're talking about interrelationships between a clinician and somebody else. But actually on the ground you end up seeing this because so often what social workers do is sitting at that intersection. You're not just getting people benefits. You're not just directing them in a certain way, but you're also having to do therapy with them, counseling with them. You're building social bonds with them, developing rapport with people in order to solve problems on a regular basis. So these two things end up, to a certain extent, bleeding together on the ground, like I said. And finally, the other thing that really kicked this off is the 2003 President's New Freedom Commission, which was a huge, huge report by the federal government. Does anybody know this report? Have you heard of this report? So if you've ever looked at it, it's a curious report. Because essentially what it's saying is that there are fundamental flaws in the way that mental health care is provided, that people are they're facing all of these problems, and that what we need to do is to get out there and empower people and get them to look after themselves and give them the tools to do that. Don't just chuck them out on the street, but give them the tools to do that. There are many ways to look at why that report came out when it did, what was behind it. But to a great extent, what was behind it were all of these features, all of these things, combination of advocacy and fiscal concerns, and concerns about the sort of everyday way in which care is provided.